Okay, and welcome back for another Runewars battle report. This time we're going to go into Game 3 of the regionals held at Warboar Games. This time I got matched up versus my friend James and his Waiqar. This is essentially a rematch of the game we'd played the night before, and to be honest, being completely new, we were expecting pretty much be playing each other for the wooden spoon at the end of the tournament. So, hey ho, here we go. Here are our lists, exactly the same as our game the night before, which I went through in a bit more detail in my very first battle report, so you can go check that one out there. The deployment was again the ambush one, and he won. He either had the bid or won the coin toss, which meant that I was deploying in the short deployment zone and he had the large one. The mission was the exploding runes, so you can see there where our rune explosions are going to be going off. I've got the fortified 6-tray terrain there in the middle, which I've made put overgrown on, and a smaller one there on my left, and a bit of rocky outcrops on the far right. So here we go, first turn, a couple of green runes, which is good for me. Reasonably okay for him, but it's not as big a deal in his army, and you can see some very lovely 3D terrain there on the left, but we were too lazy to use it, so there you go. We kick off with my son just going defensive and not over committing. I'm going to try and not lose him for no good reason this game. He pushes up his worms, definitely goes over the explodey rune bad thing. I decide to move my Scion up and defend and push Aliana up on the left. Again, I'm trying to get her into a flanking position, and I move my big block of archers into the I can't remember what it's called, the ruined walls, fortified, the big piece of terrain in the middle. And correct me if I'm wrong, please do tell me, but we read it as, even though my activation ends when I enter, the support sign says after my activation I get to make a shift if I'm within range of overgrown terrain. So we read it as I could enter and then shift out of it afterwards, which gave me a bit of wiggle room here to get round the side of his army. And you can also see on the left here that my Leonx riders have pushed up round there, definitely avoiding those bad areas of hurt. His Ardus is pushed up, and you can see on the far right here his cav have moved up and reformed a bit. He's trying to encircle me round that right flank. And you can see here my archers have just shifted around a bit, try and get themselves into a better shooting position for turn 2. So here we go, very good for me, 3 green runes. I should be able to be sliding and drifting around the place like nobody's business. His reanimates at the top have just reformed and gone defensive. Very blurry action pick here, but this is as his bowmen are shooting at my treemen, or scion, sorry. And oh, yep, he killed it. I hadn't had time to defend up. There was only 1 blue rune, so he just needed to do 6 damage to kill it, and he rolled the 3 hits that he needed. So much to both of our surprises, that was a dead scion. So again, threw those points away. Nothing really useful came of him. Isn't that fun? My archers have just taken a couple of pot shots at his reanimates. The only real, mostly because I had nothing much else to do with them, but I mostly wanted to use my wind rune to get up and slide all the way up here round his side. His worms continue their advance along that side of the table, his cav coming up behind them, and yep, he just crashes into them, but he seems okay with it. My Leonx, I dialed in a curving run here and decided I didn't want to end that close to the wind rune, so I used my metered march to back off a little bit. Aliana again has just sort of done her shifting around move, trying to encircle everything. And here's the board state. At that point his Ardus has gone into the terrain and just sort of defended up. I'm not entirely sure why he did this. Yeah, I don't know. Into turn 3, a couple of greens, that's good. 4 red, so the runes are especially no-go. I'll just tell you now, at no point do we stop on any of them. We just decided to ignore it and just make sure we just never landed on them. So he goes early with Ardus and armors up, and he's done a bit of a rally and a reform, a rally and a defend with his skeletons to make it really hard for me to punch through them. As you can see down here, I'd gone for a charge with my Leonks and came just short. I'd pre-measured, but I'm still a bit ropey on the link between the movement templates and the range templates. I was fairly sure it was going to be short, but I dialed it in anyway, figuring, well, it's where I wanted to go. So, and a panic token, the way I see it is you need to attack me for the panic token to do much, and if you're going to attack these guys, they're going to fold anyway, so who cares? My archers take a shot at Ardus, don't really achieve much, but get the double surge they need to shift away a couple of times with Lay of the Land. And you can see up here that his archers have reformed to face the threat of my army coming round. Either that's my top archers or my bottom archers actually managed to pop a couple of wounds off him. I think it's the top ones. And then, yep, I think that's that picture. My archer's taking him out, or at least wounding him. My son just sort of dials in a shot and reforms, mostly for the reform, but the shot doesn't really do much. Here we go. Now, you'll notice there's a lot more shots of my opponent in this game than in the previous ones. My excuse for this is that it was the end of a long day, the second day of tournament gaming in a row. So I was actually sat down for most of this, so the angle meant that my opponent was in most of the shots, looking vaguely confused. So into turn 4. Here we go, 2 more green runes. I got very lucky on the green runes. I don't think I ever got below 2 in this game, which meant I was able to be where I needed to be. Just measuring some stuff out here, can't remember why. Again, I was just defending up. He decided to just basically sit him in that terrain and tank my army. I don't know why. My Leonks actually go in and don't roll particularly well because he's defended up and that's fortified, but we managed to put 1 wound on him, so he's got 1 wound left. Do a panic on him, get some decent cards, but because of the fact that he's resilient to fear, or which way round it goes, I didn't have the tokens to actually do much with them. Yeah. His archers have rallied, and his reanimates have rallied and armoured up. I shoot him and he dies, unfortunately. And then reform and shift all the way over to here with my big archers. Because by this point I'd got fed up of picking away 1 or 2 reanimates just for them to come back. And the panic check, as we saw there, didn't do much on my actual riders themselves. His archers rally and reform. Blurry action shot, that's just my Aliana coming up. I dialed in the double shift, the shift on my small unit of archers, and of course with the 3rd free shift I'm just getting away from his nasty, horrible hitty killy units that are coming around there. Same as my son has moved up to throw himself courageously in the way. So into the turn 5. There we go, 2 green runes again, quite tasty. This is the board state, and we're having a little thinky about what's going on here and the choices in our lives that have led us to this particular situation. So I open up with their Scion defending up. Aliana decides it's time to actually do something. She goes in and goes batshit crazy and takes out almost all of his reanimates in one swoop. I get some fairly decent panic. He actually had dialed in the attack back, and between panic tokens I'd picked up earlier in the game and his dialed in panic, oh no, he rolled, there we go, you can just about see on these dice up here, he rolled a double panic and a dialed one in. So there we go. And actually, for her troubles, after wiping out most of the unit, Aliana turns around and runs away. Bravely. Very, very bravely. She did her job anyway. Here we go. My archers just decide to take matters into their own hands and take off the last few and shift backwards. There we go. His archers take a couple of shots at my boss. Don't do a whole lot, I seem to remember. My opponent had the worst luck. Anytime he shot with his archers, he has never once rolled the surge he needs to get the double surge to put blighted on anything. We don't know why, we don't know how, but there it is, that's how it works. I decided for whatever reason to move my Leonks into the terrain. And he dialed in, so his plan had been to put his worms into the terrain. So they just move up and crash into it, grabbing a panic token because they count as engaged. And originally my opponent was a bit frustrated by this because I'd just pipped him into putting my stuff in there. But then he remembered that part of the whole list design is that he had a dispatch runner on his cav, and he dialed in the move and ability. So they just move up, trigger the dispatch runner attack on the worms, rolls a couple of hits, couple of surges, but with their mastercrafted weapons, that is 12 hits, and I have 2 Leonks riders, so my speculative, let's just move them in, why not? What's the worst that can happen? Well, it turns out, well, they can die. That's the state of the board at the end of the turn. So here we go. 1 green rune, but it's not, I don't need it terribly. Having a good old think here about how, because now the issue is, of course, that his worms are not particularly maneuverable, and they're stuck up against terrain, which, I mean, they're probably going to kill my Leonks, but after that, I don't really know how they're going to get into the rest of my army. I dial in an early attack with my Leonks and don't really do much. Get a few panics. These are what I get. The only one that I'm allowed to trigger, I think, is Confusion. So, yay. My units get some inspiration tokens, and in return, they just get flattened by the worms. The small unit of archers, I decide that actually the time for shifting away is gone. I need to get something into his archers, so I'm pushing mine up and reforming. The big tree has tried to shoot them and doesn't. I say the big tree. The small tree tries to shoot his worms and doesn't really get much done. Aliana has reformed to face his troops. The big archer unit has shifted forward as much as it can to try and put pressure on his few remaining units. Into turn 7, a couple of green runes. We're all set up. Aliana just goes charging right in, defending up, just really putting as much pressure as she can so that those archers can't get away, and hopefully I can pick up their points on turn 8. They shoot back at her and get a wound. I think I've defended up. His worms are just reforming, and they've chucked a blighted on the scion. Again, my archers weren't in range of anything, so they've had to move up again, partly so they can maybe get a shot off next turn, but also to make it really difficult for the worms to get out of that. They must have moved in this turn and then put the blighted out, or the vice versa. Yeah, they've got their move on their second dial. Again, nothing in range of my big archer unit, so we've really just pushed everything up and hoping to be able to get the damage I need off in the last turn to clench the win. And here's our board state, a slightly better picture. So turn 8, a couple of greens which aren't that useful to me anymore. He just puts in a rally and a move with his worms just to pull them out of dodge. I went for a very late turn. I went for a late turn charge, dialed that in with Aliana because that's where her 4 charges, knowing that that meant I'm gonna have to take some shots. Yeah, so he shoots me with his archers. Something happens, I think probably the panic check, which gives me an immobilized token, which is actually a bit of a pain, which is unfortunate. However, my big wind rune unit opens fire at them, takes out half of them, and I'm able to use my rallying starling to actually get rid of that immobilized token on Aliana. The smaller unit opens fire and again gets an absolutely cracking result down here. So you can shift. I've readied the tempered steel already, so that's 6 hits. So it takes down half of the knights, which will get me the points for the unit, if not for the upgrades. So Aliana is actually able to go in and actually goes into the flank of the knights, because I figured there was no point trying to mop up the archers because they're below 2 trays anyway and had no upgrades. So she goes in trying to finish off the last 2 knights, and does so. And I'm fairly sure that's where the game ends. So we tote everything up, and it comes out that I scored 116 points. James picked up 54, which ended up in another 7-4 win to me, which I was quite happy with. We discussed it after the game. He realised that his list needs a bit more manoeuvrability, so it's back to the drawing board for that one. The Worm Star is fun when it hits something, but you're going to have to work hard and have a very the rest of the list needs to be designed around supporting that. So overall, I finished 4th out of 6. Not a huge turnout, but a very, very fun day. And I've hugely enjoyed my introduction to Runewars and the Runewars tournament scene, and looking forward to my next games. Thank you for tuning in, and goodbye.